Good to go. 6:15. Perfect. Perfect timing. So we're going to go over three main topics. We're going to go over carb cycling, then we're going to go over nutrition or eating for muscle gain, and then we're going to go over eating for body types, and then we'll probably have a little bit of time, just open Q&A. If there's anything along the time that you have notes or you have questions about, you can either write them down and save them for the end, or you can just say them as they, just raise your hand and just let me know what it is if it's coming and you don't want to worry about waiting until later on, okay? So at any point, if you have any question about anything I'm saying or clarification, please let me know so that I can clear things up a little bit. All right? All right, so the first thing is carb cycling, and I'm going to go over kind of what it is and what these two slides mean. They're the same thing, just doubled up for your left-right brain, right? All carb cycling is one, if you look at nutrition and protocols and styles of eating, right, those are all just delivery methods. One of those things independently is not a solution. It is not the cause of a result. It is a tool you use to get to a result. So if you look at carb cycling or calorie cycling, or if you look at keto, or if you look at any diet label, it's all doing the same thing. It's all manipulating the energy balance. Carb cycling is just a tool that's a little more of a intuitive tool to use to manage that, right? So when you say carb cycling worked for this person or carb cycling didn't work for me, that is giving carb cycling the value and ownership when really it's the individual. Okay? So a few reasons that we use carb cycling. One, if you are someone who doesn't like counting, right? Carb cycling can be a natural or kind of a hack to manipulating calories without thinking about manipulating calories. So that would be like, you know, people say I went low carb or no carb and lost blank and blank weight. Well, them going low carb isn't the reason they lost weight. Them slashing their calories is the reason they lost weight. So carb cycling is a way to do that in a more moderate way. So I'm sure you've all tried to go no carb and you make it about 72 hours and you have no energy and you're like, this is awful, and then you binge and then you get into another cyclical rate of like not making progress. Carb cycling is leaning into the fact that this should be cyclical in purpose and you're intending for it to be cyclical. So you can use carb cycling as a way to manage calories. You can also use carb cycling to help with insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance. You can also use carb cycling to manipulate metabolism, asterisks, that's kind of a gray area. We'll get into that, right? And you can also use carb cycling as a way to potentially multiply the effects of muscle gain, okay, and or fat loss. So when it comes down to the basics of carb cycling, if we think about carbohydrates, not as good or bad, but if we think about carbohydrates being in a glass, right, and throughout the day, we are either putting things into the glass or we're removing things out of the glass. That's calories. Carbohydrates being one of the types of calories. If we were doing little to no movement, it is hard for us to get rid of carbohydrates because we're not doing anything. So if we're intaking a lot of carbohydrates and not doing anything, that cup fills fast and it stores, and then it overfills. Overfill is fat storage from a calorie standpoint. So if we are super low movement, then being low carbohydrates matches that type of output. So if I were to do minimal things, then eating minimal carbohydrates would match. If I were to do a lot of things, then I should have a lot of carbohydrates to match. Because for the most part, output requires carbohydrates, which is sugars stored in your body. Okay, not sugars like table sugar, but more of like glycogen, which is like stored sugars inside your body. So carb cycling, if I say, well, if I didn't do a lot of movement today, I'm not going to have a lot of carbohydrates. If I did a lot of movement, then I'll eat a lot of carbohydrates. If I did a medium amount, then I'll eat a medium amount of carbohydrates. So that's all carb cycling is pairing your energy, your output, to the volume of carbohydrates, right? Now, if you were to be overeating 7 days in a row and you were to be doing carb cycling, right, you would not net the benefit of carb cycling. You may net the benefit of having higher quality movement days because now you have energy, but at the end of the week, if you're still overeating in fats and proteins, it's not going to matter because the total equation still matters. But let's just say that if you were to have the same ratio, these are arbitrary numbers, right? Let's say if I were to have 33% fats, 33% carbs, 33% proteins, 7 days in a row. And then all of a sudden I was like, all right, well, I'm going to take my 33% carbs to 20% and then to 40%, and I work out every other day. At the end of the week, I have a net of less carbohydrates, but my protein fats stay the same. So by 7 days, I've actually consumed less total food, and I did that via carbohydrates. So we see how manipulating the carbohydrates can manipulate total energy in. Does that make sense? Vertical head nods? Good? Good? Okay, so why this becomes intuitive and why this can be a good tool is because you can just look at what's in front of you and say, those are all carbs. Did I do any movement today? Well, I don't eat those. I eat my proteins and fats and vegetables. And the next day, you're like, I worked out, or I did some sort of version of exercise. Okay, are there carbs in front of me? I'll eat those. So that's a very natural, intuitive way of just manipulating your energy by your output. You don't have to count anything. You can literally just say those are carbs, those aren't. So it could be as absolute as like, I'm not going to eat any carbs and I'm going to eat some, or it could be like, I'm eating minimal, I'm eating maximal. You can fluctuate between those variances. Okay. As we're looking at these examples, this is kind of an example of low, medium, and high days. So low days, less than 100 grams, would be something like you go for a 30-minute walk, or you do some sort of 30-minute yoga session, or you do resets, or you do mobility, or you have a full rest day. That would be like a low day, less than 100 grams of carbohydrates. And we do say, when we say less than 100 grams of carbohydrates, that is not we don't count vegetables, right? Vegetables aren't in our equation of carbohydrates for our process and our headspace. Okay, but fruit and all the other things that we have carbohydrates with, that would be something. A medium day, that would be if you did some sort of, you're looking at less than an hour of movement and you're looking at less intensity and less load. So if it's like something that's a 5 out of 10 difficult for 45-ish minutes, that's like a medium day output. And then you have a high day output, which would be full lifting days, intense cardio, or long endurance events. And that would be like a high carb day. So then you can see how your week looks. I can just pair up what days I have in my week, and I can pair up my carbohydrates with that. One of the ways this helps with insulin resistance in a small portion is you can magnify this by having your carbohydrates around exercise, which is going to teach your body a better way of utilizing carbohydrates. So if I'm having my 150 grams of carbohydrates and I'm having 75 the hour before and the hour after exercise, my body is understanding this is what you want me to do with carbohydrates. And then the next day you have a rest day and you have less than 100, it says, oh, well, you're not giving me carbohydrates, so let me maybe I'll start to look around and try to see what else is happening in my body. Maybe I'll look for alternative fuel sources, and you start to make that shift a little bit to where your body goes, oh, this is what I do with carbs. Oh, this is what I do with them. Instead of it thinking, well, I guess I'll just store them and wait till they use them later, right? Which is fat gain, right? Yeah, that's all that is. Oh, see? Told you. I think I have to push this button. Okay, well, it's got a timeout. And that's all carb cycling is. That's it. That's all it is. So you can do it constantly. So you could literally do it every day that you're doing exercise. You can pair up, and you can also just go through phases where you can just do it, you know, one day a week, and you're like, well, I'm not really doing much today. I'm going to go low on my carbs. And that one day may still have an effect on your week. So it's not something that has to be, well, I better do carb cycling for the next 42 days. It can be something you add and take away at any point you want, just to help you manage the energy in, energy out. Okay? There's a little bit of an advanced carb cycling carb refeed, which is a way that you would eat all of your carbohydrates post-exercise. And this is kind of a nuanced, bro-science-y kind of thing. My body really appreciates it. So that would be like me starting the day off with proteins and fats, and then I have a little bit of carbs at lunch. I have a full lifting day, and then I eat my 300 grams of carbs after my workout that evening. That's just giving my body a lot of signals that, and especially I would do it with white rice. I'm going to eat like 3 cups of white rice for dinner. That's going to give my body a lot of signals, pairing up with resistance training, that it's like, oh, they did all this stuff with my muscles. They're giving me all this like fun, easy glycogen. Well, I'm going to send it there. I'm going to just, muscles, eat all this stuff up, right? And it gives my body like these signals. So that's carb refeeding, which is like a variation of carb cycling. Because you can manipulate that inside the day, not just day to day. Cool?
You kind of hit on it. I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
Carbs, is there a formula that, okay, I'm going to bike for 2 hours, I should do 100 here, 21 biking, and 8 when I'm done?
Okay.
I mean, you hit on a little bit, but
yeah.
I'm wondering if there's some better way.
So when you're looking at, there's bubbles. So if you look at pre and post exercise, you've got this window of like 30 to 100 grams that your body can, and your GI system can handle before and after exercise. So if you're taking like an hour of exercise, you know, we always say like 40 to 60 grams before, 40, 60 after. Saying that, if you're doing a multiple hour event, then you want to be consuming that same sort of window hourly. So if I know I'm doing 3 hours of movement and I want my performance to stay high and my energy to stay high during that thing, I should be aiming 20, 40, 60 grams of carbohydrates hourly as I go through. And then once you get past like 2 or 3 hours, then you have to really get into like a lot of stuff. But if you're taking a 2-hour bike ride and there's any kind of intensity and you want the performance to stay high, you want that 20 to 60 grams at the hour, 45-minute mark, 60-minute mark, 90-minute mark. Yeah. Cool, cool. Anything else? Does that make sense? Is there any questions about that? Any questions about implementation? Any questions about what carbs are? Yes. White rice, white potato, white oats. Those are my 3 favorite. And then after that, fruit, obviously, yeah, fruit for sure. Kind of get into a mix of like nut butters. That can be like a protein carb or fat carb. And then oat bars. Tortillas are definitely like a especially during endurance events and like long endurance days. Big fan of tortillas and almond butter. Tortillas, almond butter, banana. That's like and honey. That's a really good carb source. And then sometimes we'll get into a little bit of different types of like wild grains, but that's kind of at random, and that's going to be on a day that I'm not really concerned about the fiber that comes with like a farro or a wild rice or a what's another type of grain? Quinoa, right? That's like a high fiber one. Beans, not really that fan. And then we do gluten-free bread. Not because gluten-free is like going to magically do anything, but our bodies don't appreciate gluten, so we do as many gluten-free things as possible. But we also don't have a problem having white tortillas. But if I were to whole wheat tortilla, my body would hate me. So there's a difference, and that's something that's learned, and that's something with practice and play and testing. It's basically a lot of oats and white rice. A bunch. I mean, I've been eating white rice for 20 years. Easily. Big fan of white rice. Favorite. We buy the big 20-pound bags at Costco. 1,000% over brown rice. Muscles love white rice. Because it's like sponge. Yep. White potatoes, we make like our normal Saturday breakfast after we come and teach. So we go home and scramble eggs and make hash browns and then come lift. That's our normal pre-workout meal on the weekends. Is also surprisingly delicious. I'm telling you, don't hate, but it's tasty. Yeah.
We have a huge bag of white rice and we have like a rice cooker. But do you like keep a huge batch made up like in your refrigerator, or you cook it fresh every time? A little bit of both.
We usually put like 2 cups of dried rice in the rice cooker. That takes half an hour, and then we usually consume half-ish of it, maybe, and then like the next night eat the other second half. Yep. And since we kind of usually do day on, day off with lifting, it kind of sets into that nice pattern because it'll last a day or two in the fridge and then eat it again. Yeah. Kodiak pancakes is something else that Danny does a bunch of, and we do randomly. Both, carb and protein. Yeah. 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 Well, let's just say that if you were to make a cup of Kodiak pancakes, Danielle knows the macros way better. Yeah, it's like 20 grams of protein, but it's another 30. What do you usually make?
So I do one serving, it's like 38, 40 grams of carbs and like 14 grams of protein.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I have to cut, right? Yes, I think it covers 2, right?
So it would be that would be half a serving of protein, full serving of carb. Right. You pair that up with, half a cup of egg whites, and now you have a full serving of carbs, full serving of protein. Yeah. Yes. One, you have to set your expectations appropriately. 2, the gluten-free bread at Costco in the yellow package that comes in the 2 loaves is legit. Yeah. Yeah. The gluten-free bread at Costco is not bad. It's pretty bad. Yeah, they're not. No. Not at all. Okay, perfect. That's 20 minutes on that block. Look at that. Okay? All right. So, yeah.